Diving day 2, and we are emerging to seek coffee before the hordes arrive. So that's the island that we'll be diving off when we go onto the dive boat. And that is a big ass boat. Jen actually came out here last night to see if she could see any jellyfish in the lights, but if they were around, they were not everywhere. She didn't see any. The breakfast area had these signs everywhere warning us to be careful and that the birds would get any unattended food. And sure enough, we quickly got into the habit of leaving one person as a guard while the other went in to get more food or coffee. Rain and rainbows in the morning. Between the warm weather and the rainbows, I'm pretty sure Jen just decided this place was heaven. So every other morning, we actually have a boat dive in the morning. So this is going to be our only time while we're here that we are kind of on our own all day. So we're planning to go south. We're going to see if we can manage to get into Salt Pier. It is this really cool sounding dive with pylons, kind of like the oil rigs we dive back home. Trick is, you can only go there if there's not a ship scheduled. So apparently you don't know until you get out there if you can dive it or not. So the Wi-Fi doesn't work in the room. I have to come out here to do my stretches and use the internet. Unfortunately, there is an unpleasant amount of mosquitoes buzzing around. We're getting eaten alive anytime we're outside. The good news is today should be a little calmer because we already have food set so we can come here and just eat. We have to go do 2 dives at a time because of the way this place works. You can't leave too much in the car because things might get stolen. So we have to look at the guide, which is on our phone here. We have to go do the dives, do 2 tanks, and then come back to get a fresh pair of tanks anyway, and then we check the next dive sites. We're probably going to do 2 sets of 2 dive excursions, unless we're faster than we think, and then, we still can't do night dives, actually. Jellyfish alert is still ongoing. They won't kill you, but they are super painful. Also, this is the rare room I've been in where I actually like the decor. That's the salt fields down south where we're about to go diving. So we have picked up our gear at the locker room. I got a piece of wood so we could block up the tanks, and now I'm coming around so we can get our 4 tanks for the morning nitrox dives. And Jen is over there testing them while I bring the car around. As I mentioned before, break-ins at the dive site are apparently very, very common, so we couldn't have our phone with us. This was a bit of a challenge because we didn't know how to get around the island, but we soon figured out that there were certain key turns we had to make. Most of the challenge involved which way to go at certain traffic circles, which I kept track of with a bunch of amusing mnemonics. Jen was at first annoyed by this, but hey, my system worked. It also seemed like no matter what you did, if you drove long enough, you were going to end up back at this little strip, so you could really only get so lost. The ironic thing is we needed to buy spices last night. I was trying to buy garlic salt. We could have just stole some all natural. So we assume we're good to dive because there are other people diving and the sign just says security level 1, but we shall see. If all of a sudden we get picked up by a vortex 40 feet above, that will be so fun and memorable and will be famous on Reddit. And here Taters does her surf entry. The claim to fame of this dive site is these pylons basically sticking down into the bottom. It's not a real deep site, but all of the columns give the fish a lot of places where they like to hide. This was also the first time we'd run into any significant number of other divers, and there were a good amount of them. Fortunately, they mostly stayed on the reef edge, and when we went into the shallower areas, we pretty much had it to ourselves. As I mentioned, we really enjoy that sense of flying you get when you're over a big drop, so we ended up drifting off of the reef just to kind of play around. These guys actually saw us doing that and must have thought we were looking at something, and they promptly went way too deep where there wasn't anything. While sadly this area doesn't have any clownfish, which are generally Jen's favorite fish, there were plenty of porcupine puffers, which she also does really love. There was rarely any sort of actual navigation challenge on these dives, but this site in particular was pretty straightforward. The visibility was high enough that we could always see the next pylon or the next support structure. If you notice these striped sergeants where they look like they're guarding a part of the pylon and swimming back and forth, they're actually protecting a whole thing of eggs. They wave back and forth over them to keep them oxygenated, and they'll chase you off if you get too close. I was basically endlessly entertained by swimming through these big schools of grunts. They don't really mind when you're going through as long as you move slow. They'll just kind of separate as you go through after swimming along with you for a second and then reform behind you. And just as we were about to surface, I found Jen a turtle. Apparently they like to hang out in the shallows here, and quickest way to find them is just look where all the snorkelers and divers are gathered around. Okay, so we're kind of pairing the dive so we don't have to go too far. We just did Salt Pier, which is on the north end of that pier there. And now we're over here at Invisibles that had kind of an interesting structure, it looks like. Honestly, they mark the dive sites with those yellow buoys, but from what we've been hearing, it's more just to try and concentrate the parking and the impact. How does this water feel colder every dive? The water was actually 85 degrees, which is super warm. Per what we heard from some locals, the average in Bonaire year-round is pretty much 80 degrees. It's warmer towards August and September, and for whatever reason, the warm water was hanging around longer this year. However, as you're doing repeated dives, your body gets more and more sensitive to cold since you're immersed and losing heat for hours at a time. As I mentioned yesterday, there are basically zones to most of these dive sites. Up here we're in the shallows where it's pretty much just sand with the occasional bit of coral sticking up here or there. Down here at maybe 30-ish feet, it transitions from sand to basically being dominated by soft corals. There are a lot of fish here, and generally they're different ones than what we were seeing further down the wall. And then down below that you have this gradually sloping rock wall reef. Depending on the area, it seemed like this would run down to maybe 60, 80 feet, sometimes deeper if you were further north. Once you got to the bottom, there was more sand, and in the south, there's this really cool double reef setup, so we could actually cross over. Our usual plan was to cross over to the deeper reef, float around till we ended up low on air at about, 70, 80 feet, and then come back and gradually work our way back up to the soft coral area. This was actually the only ray we saw the entire time we were here, and unfortunately we only saw him at a distance, so I'm not sure if he was a spotted eagle ray or something else. If you look really close in a lot of the cracks, you do find little shrimp like this. I think these are banded shrimp. However, with no macro lens on the GoPro, we're not ideally set up to capture them. So our morning dives were all 70, we're both 70 some minutes, so they ran long, and we came back here to eat before we are going to try and go a little north and see if we can find some sites to do up there. Compared with the southern dive sites, which were pretty straightforward to get to, the northern ones involved going on this little tiny narrow road called the Queens Highway. Rumors and signage claim this is a two-way street, but we have our doubts. Thousand Steps was one of the sites we saw pop up on those best of Bonaire, don't miss this dive site sort of lists. Its claim to fame is it has a set of stairs leading down to the beach. For the record, there are only 67 steps, and if you ask me, this is pretty mellow. We got 1,000 steps in Laguna that's 260, I think. While there were other divers there, this beach is also just popular with tourists wanting to lay out, swim. This time we decided just for grins to do the thing we should have done on the Hilma Hooker dive and swim all the way out to the buoy, which practically got Jen run over by a boat. If it looks like our footage is a little different today, that's because I was actually trying out this wide-angle lens from Backscatter. I actually think it was a real improvement, which is kind of unfortunate because it's one other piece of gear to hassle with. I actually liked it so much that I used it for every other dive on this trip except for the night dives, where I found that basically it gave me too wide of an angle and it was outrunning my lights. While there were some particulates in the water, as near as I could tell, our visibility is what I would call at about 80 feet, which was a good solid amount. It really gave us a sense of scale as we were diving, and you could actually look up and see the surface way above you. The rule when diving is you go down to your deepest point and then you work your way back up for the rest of the dive. Here, we were quickly finding that down at 80 feet, there just wasn't nearly as much to see. It was a lot better hanging out at about, 40, 50 feet. I even got Jen to take the camera for a bit. Diving with a camera is one of those mixed blessings. I love having the footage, I love being able to make videos like this, but it does kind of distract you from things like, having proper buoyancy and trim. And so, with no clownfish in this part of the world, she promptly started chasing pufferfish around trying to get footage of them. They have this way of giving you side-eye and just not cooperating with the shot you're trying to get. These lionfish look really cool, but they're actually invasive all across the Caribbean. They've been trying to introduce them as a food source to keep the population down. This is why I describe scuba diving as the closest you can get to flying. Check out this parrot throwing it in reverse. I'm pretty sure the angel had to be guarding a nest. These schools of blue tangs were just wandering around, usually with like 1 or 2 parrots. They'd latch onto a particular rock and they'd just all go to town pecking away at it until they decided to pass on to the next one. They were really entertaining to watch. I caught sight of this and waved Jen over, having no idea what it was. Turns out it's actually a flamingo-tongue snail. They actually feed on toxic coral and then they basically use that toxin to protect themselves. And this was me trying to make Jen laugh. I like to come out of the water as close to the shore as possible, so when we get down to 600 psi or so, we would go into the real shallows where we were in maybe, 10, 15 feet of water. We actually did find some interesting stuff here. The coral was more spread out, but we found a lot of these staghorn colonies and just other random things. Diving is amazing and I really love it, but the one thing that does kind of suck is after you've been underwater for 70 minutes and your body's kind of forgotten what gravity is, you emerge and all of a sudden have to drag your dive gear out of the water, across the sand, and then sometimes up some stairs. Jack is probably sad he's missing out on this. While it wasn't quite dark yet, the sun was going down quickly. We could have done a second dive. We had another set of tanks, but Jen was really concerned about the stories we'd heard about jellyfish and didn't want to be out in the water only to find we had like a giant clump of jellyfish blocking us from coming back to the shore. So rather than go back the way we came, we actually continued to the north. The road turns into a one-way. I know, it doesn't look much different. And then goes up through Rincon. Taters is happy because she made a friend. The friend is not very happy because I think he wants food, not affection.
I have no food,
and he's like, yeah, screw you. We didn't have a ton of daylight, but we did decide to play tourist and stop at this overlook. For the most fun one can have at 7 o'clock at night, cleaning. And now instead of eating at some resort restaurant like a plebeian, we get to cook in bikinis at our little kitchen thing. So I think we're having like veggies and mystery sauce. You never know what we're getting here because some of the things, it was kind of interpretive. For example, I got these thinking they'd be little like crackers or things. No, apparently they're like ice cream toppings, so they're fine, but we lack ice cream to put them on. There was kind of a running joke that I wasn't sure what was and wasn't cat food, but as long as it tastes reasonable, I'll drink cat coffee. So we only got in 3 dives today, but they were all 70 plus minutes, so we feel pretty good and accomplished. And unlike the dive boats where, you're doing 4 or 5 dives, but everything's handled for you and you just have to jump in the water, we got to get food, get tanks, run around. So pretty good day. So that giant building looking thing in the background is actually a cruise ship. It arrived during coffee. And Blondie said it was disgusting, but she says that about RVs and me half the time when I'm wearing short shorts.
That's not true. I never say that about you.
It's more with the eye roll.